For 3 years, my boss presented my work to executives as if he'd built it himself. Then, 10 minutes before the biggest board meeting of his career, our CFO looked across the conference table and said, "Daniel, we'd actually like Rachel to present the model." Daniel Price stopped arranging his notes. "Rachel?" Linda Carver nodded toward me. "She built the methodology. The board wants to hear it from her." For 1 second, Daniel's face showed exactly what he was thinking. Then the polished executive smile returned. "Of course." He leaned toward me while Linda spoke to another director. "Just stick to my slides," he whispered. I looked at the presentation glowing on his laptop. The first slide read Customer Retention Strategy Daniel Price. My name wasn't anywhere on it. "Which slides?" I asked quietly. "The ones you made, or the ones I did?" His jaw tightened. "Rachel, not now." He was right about one thing. That moment hadn't started in that boardroom. It had started 3 years earlier, when I was 42 and still believed good work eventually introduced itself. I was a senior customer insights manager for a consumer healthcare company in Minneapolis. We weren't glamorous. We sold subscription-based employee health and wellness services to mid-sized companies, and my job was to understand why customers renewed, expanded, complained, or left. I'd spent 15 years in analytics, which meant I had learned two things about corporate problems. Executives usually noticed them after customers did, and the first explanation everyone agreed on was often wrong. That year, our retention rate had fallen sharply. Leadership blamed pricing. We'd raised rates across several product tiers, and within 2 quarters, cancellations increased. The explanation sounded obvious. Daniel, then our senior director of customer strategy, told his team exactly what he wanted. Find the price point where churn accelerates. Leadership needs a number. I spent 2 weeks looking for it. I couldn't. Pricing mattered, but the pattern wasn't clean enough. Some customers accepted larger increases and renewed. Others left after relatively small increases. So I stopped asking what departing customers had paid and started asking what had happened to them before renewal. I combined service tickets, complaint histories, contract dates, account manager notes, survey responses, and renewal outcomes. Then a pattern appeared. Customers who left were disproportionately likely to have experienced repeated unresolved service problems, roughly 3 to 4 months before their contracts came up. Pricing wasn't always the trigger. Often it was the final insult. I showed Daniel the first analysis on a Wednesday afternoon. He barely looked at it. "This is too complicated," he said. "Executives don't need another dashboard." "It's not a dashboard. It's an early warning system." "Same difference." "No. A dashboard tells us who left. This tells us who might leave before they decide." That got his attention. I showed him a cluster of 17 accounts entering renewal within 120 days. My model flagged 5 as unusually high risk. Daniel pointed at one. "Hawthorne Medical? They love us. Their account manager thinks they do. That's usually relevant. They've opened 11 service tickets in 6 months. 4 were reopened after being marked resolved. Their satisfaction score dropped 23 points, and their HR director stopped attending quarterly review calls." Daniel leaned back. "And you think they're leaving?" "I think we should ask before they do." He gave me permission to work with the account team, mostly because there was little downside. Hawthorne was worth about $1.4 million annually. 2 days later, their HR director admitted they were preparing a competitor review and had no intention of renewing under the current service conditions. That changed the room. We assigned a recovery team, fixed the unresolved implementation problems, gave them a revised service plan, and retained the account. Suddenly, Daniel loved the model. "We need to get this in front of leadership," he said. I spent the next 4 days cleaning the methodology, validating the assumptions, and building a presentation that explained the pattern without pretending. One successful account proved everything. The title slide said Retention Risk Model. Underneath, in smaller type, Rachel Morgan, Customer Insights. The morning of the executive meeting, Daniel told me he'd present because the audience was senior. "You'll be there for technical questions," he said. I was disappointed, but not alarmed. Daniel was my boss. Presenting upward was part of his job. During the meeting, he opened with, "My team has been developing a new approach to identifying retention risk before renewal." My team. I noticed the phrase, but let it pass. 10 minutes later, the COO asked how we'd identified the service ticket pattern. Daniel said, We started looking beyond traditional price sensitivity and found behavioral signals earlier in the customer journey. Another small shift. Then he clicked to my methodology slide and said, "What I wanted to build was something predictive rather than reactive." I looked at him. That was almost exactly how I had explained the idea to him 2 weeks earlier, right before he'd called it another dashboard. Nobody else knew that. The meeting went well. Very well. Leadership approved a broader pilot. Afterward, the COO shook Daniel's hand. "Smart work." Daniel thanked him. Then he gestured toward me. "Rachel helped with a lot of the analysis." Helped. I had designed the methodology, built the model, validated the data, identified the first account, and created every slide he'd just presented. But the COO was already moving toward his next meeting. In the hallway, I stopped Daniel. "You made it sound like the model was yours." He sighed. "Rachel, don't get hung up on credit. I'm not hung up on it. I'm asking why you said you wanted to build something you didn't build. Because I'm accountable for the function. When your work succeeds, the team succeeds. And when the team succeeds, you say I?" His expression cooled. "This is how leadership works. Your visibility comes through me. Keep delivering, and people will know your value." I wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than admitting my boss had just taken something from me while explaining that I should be grateful for the exposure. So I went back to work. Over the next month, I expanded the model. The pilot flagged another vulnerable account, then another. We weren't always right, which mattered to me. I tracked false positives, adjusted thresholds, and documented every change because a model that only advertised its successes wasn't analysis. It was marketing. 6 weeks later, Daniel sent a presentation to the executive team summarizing our early results. I opened it, expecting to see the updated slides I'd given him that morning. Most were there. My charts were there. My language was there. My methodology was there. Only one thing had changed. The original title, Retention Risk Model Rachel Morgan, was gone. In its place, centered in large blue letters, were 4 words I had never written: the Price Retention Strategy. Daniel's last name was Price. I scrolled through all 27 slides looking for mine. It wasn't there once. That was the first time my boss took my name off my work. It would not be the last. By the end of the first year, nobody inside the executive team called it the retention risk model anymore. They called it Daniel's strategy. The strange part was that the change happened gradually enough that every individual moment felt too small to start a fight over. When the model helped us retain a regional hospital network worth just under $2 million a year, Daniel presented the results at our quarterly leadership meeting. I sat 3 chairs away while he explained how our approach had identified deteriorating customer behavior before renewal. At the end, the chief operating officer said, "Daniel, this is exactly the kind of thinking we need." Daniel smiled. "We're just getting started." Then he looked toward me and added, "Rachel's been great on the analytical support." Analytical support. I wrote the phrase in my notebook and underlined it twice. 6 months later, I had rebuilt almost half the model because our original thresholds produced too many false positives among smaller accounts. The change wasn't glamorous. It required weeks of testing, customer segmentation, interviews with account managers, and several uncomfortable conversations with our data engineering team about fields everyone had assumed were reliable but weren't. That was the work Daniel never saw. He saw the finished slide. One Tuesday, we were presenting the updated results to finance when Aaron Patel, a finance director I'd worked with for years, asked why false positives had fallen so sharply. Daniel answered immediately. "We refined the sensitivity thresholds." Aaron nodded. "How?" Daniel paused. I knew that pause. His laptop was open in front of him. A message appeared on my screen beneath the conference table. "Daniel, what's driving the improvement?" I stared at it. He was sitting 6 feet away from me. Aaron was still waiting. Another message appeared. "Need quick answer." I typed, "Segmented thresholds by contract size plus renewal window. Removed raw ticket volume as standalone predictor. Reweighted, unresolved, reopened cases." Daniel glanced down at his phone. "We segmented the thresholds by contract size and renewal window," he said. "Raw ticket volume was creating noise, so we reweighted, unresolved, and reopened cases." Aaron leaned forward. "That makes sense. Good adjustment." Daniel nodded. "It made a significant difference." I felt heat rise into my face, not because he had repeated my answer, He was presenting the work. Technical support during a meeting was normal. What bothered me was how effortlessly the room converted my knowledge into evidence of his expertise. Afterward, Aaron caught me near the elevators. Nice work on the data cleanup, I was surprised. How did you know that was mine? He smiled. Because Daniel didn't know what a false positive was 2 years ago. I laughed, but the comment stayed with me. Then why does everyone call it his strategy? Aaron's smile disappeared. You should probably ask yourself that. I did. I just didn't do anything about it yet. Daniel's career accelerated. He was promoted from senior director to vice president of customer strategy midway through the second year. The announcement praised his innovative retention framework and specifically mentioned the company's improved ability to identify at-risk customers before renewal. I read the announcement 3 times. Then I closed my office door. I wasn't naive enough to believe the model alone had earned Daniel the promotion. He managed a large organization, handled executive relationships well, and had responsibilities far beyond my work. But I also wasn't naive enough anymore to pretend my work hadn't become part of the story he told about why he deserved it. My own annual review arrived 2 months later. Daniel rated me highly. Strong analytical judgment, excellent cross-functional collaboration, significant contribution to retention performance. Then came the development section. Rachel would benefit from greater executive presence and visibility. I stared at that sentence until the words became almost funny. The man who had spent 2 years standing between me and executive visibility had formally identified my lack of executive visibility as a weakness. I brought it up in our review meeting. How am I supposed to improve this? Daniel looked genuinely confused. Improve what? Executive visibility. Present more. You present my work. Because it sits within my organization. Then where exactly am I supposed to become visible? He leaned back. Rachel, I think you're starting to view this too transactionally. Credit is transactional? Leadership isn't about putting your name on every idea. I'm not asking for every idea. I'm asking for my work. His expression changed. Be careful about sounding territorial. Senior leaders think at enterprise level. I left that meeting angry at him, and for the first time, angry at myself. I had spent 2 years telling myself that competence eventually became undeniable. But competence could remain invisible for a very long time if someone more senior kept translating it into his own authority. The person who finally forced me to confront that was Maya Chen. She joined my team early in year 3, 29 years old, sharp, curious, and incapable of pretending not to notice obvious things. During her second week, I walked her through the retention system. She asked questions about weighting, historical validation, and how we treated accounts with incomplete service data. Halfway through, she stopped me. Can I ask something politically dangerous? Those are usually the useful questions. Why does everyone call this Daniel's model? I looked at her. They don't call it Daniel's model. The sales director did yesterday. He probably meant Daniel's organization. The onboarding deck literally says price retention strategy. I had forgotten that. It's complicated. Maya raised an eyebrow. Did he build it? No. Did you? Yes. Then it's not that complicated. Hearing it from someone new embarrassed me. I had accumulated explanations Maya didn't have yet. Daniel had more seniority, leadership worked differently. The team mattered more than the individual. I would eventually get opportunities. None of those explanations changed authorship. I should have corrected it earlier, I admitted. Maya shrugged. You can correct it now. I didn't launch a campaign. I did something quieter. I started documenting ownership properly. Every methodology memo had an author and contributors. Every model update had version history. Every technical decision included the person who made it. When Maya improved our treatment of incomplete survey data, I put her name on the methodology note. When Aaron validated the financial impact, his name appeared beside finance validation. When I redesigned the renewal risk scoring, mine appeared under model owner. Daniel noticed within a month. He returned a deck I'd prepared for an executive review. The authorship line had been deleted. I walked into his office with my laptop. Why did you remove the contributor names? The slide was cluttered. It was one line. Executives don't care who built which spreadsheet. It's not a spreadsheet. You know what I mean. I looked at the title slide. His name remained beneath the presentation title. Then why does your name keep staying on it? Daniel's face hardened. Because I'm presenting. That's not the same as building it. Rachel, I'm not having this conversation every time we prepare a deck. Neither am I. That's why I'm asking for a standard. The standard is that work produced by this department belongs to the company. Agreed. But company ownership isn't the same thing as personal authorship. He closed the laptop. This fixation is going to hurt you. How? People who move up understand that credit flows both ways. Does it? He stared at me. What is that supposed to mean? My performance review says I need executive visibility. You remove my name from executive work. I'm trying to understand which direction the credit is flowing. He didn't answer. After that, our relationship changed. He remained professional, but I was no longer his easy source of invisible expertise. Then the company implemented a broad price increase, and within 2 quarters, our renewal forecast deteriorated faster than anyone expected. The CEO wanted answers. Finance wanted numbers. Sales wanted someone else to blame. Daniel called me into his office late on a Monday and closed the door. The board is reviewing retention next month, he said. This is going to be ugly. I know. I need you to update the model and build the board analysis. What question are we answering? Why customers are leaving? That's not one question. Then answer the useful version. I waited. Daniel leaned toward me. Build me something that makes this look manageable. 3 years earlier, I might have heard that as an instruction to make him look good. This time I heard exactly what he had said. I'll build something accurate, I told him. If it's manageable, the data will show us. The board review changed the problem before it changed my career. For months, leadership had been treating the retention decline as the predictable cost of higher prices. Daniel had encouraged that explanation because it was simple and because his strategy had been positioned as the mechanism that would keep the damage under control. But when I rebuilt the analysis, pricing wasn't the strongest signal. Customers who received the new rates and had otherwise healthy service histories were renewing at lower rates, but not catastrophically lower. The real collapse was concentrated somewhere else. Accounts that had received the price increase after experiencing unresolved service problems were leaving at almost 3 times the rate of comparable customers. I checked the result twice, then rebuilt the comparison using different thresholds. The pattern remained. Maya reviewed my logic independently. This isn't a pricing story, she said. Not by itself. No. She pointed at one segment. What happened here? I opened the service history. 9 months earlier, Daniel's organization had sponsored a cost reduction initiative that moved part of our customer support operation to an outside vendor. On paper, average response times had improved because simple tickets were being closed faster. But complex cases were being transferred repeatedly, and reopened cases had increased sharply. The overall service metric looked acceptable because the easy cases diluted the failures. Customers didn't experience averages. They experienced their own unresolved problems. Pull the outsourcing implementation dates, I told Maya. And don't assume causation. I want to know whether the timing survives controls for account size, product mix, and price increase. We spent the next 6 days testing it. Aaron from finance validated the revenue exposure. The conclusion became harder to avoid. The price increase was amplifying dissatisfaction that already existed, and the service change had created a significant portion of that dissatisfaction. I took the findings to Daniel Friday afternoon. He read the summary without speaking. How confident are you? In the relationship? Very. In claiming the outsourcing change caused every loss? I'm not. Good. He pushed the pages back toward me. Then don't frame it that way. I'm not planning to. Lead with price elasticity. That's only part of the result. It's the part the board expects. That's not a reason to make it the headline. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. Rachel, the board isn't an academic seminar. They need a coherent story. They need an accurate one. And accuracy includes uncertainty. You just said you can't prove causation. Correct. Which is why the deck says accounts with unresolved service failures show materially higher churn after the increase. It doesn't say outsourcing caused all churn. He turned around. Put the service correlation in the appendix. I stared at him. Why? Because otherwise, we're going to spend the entire meeting debating an operational issue instead of discussing the retention plan. It is the retention plan. If service failures are multiplying price sensitivity, we can't solve the problem with offers and account targeting alone. His voice became quieter. That outsourcing decision was approved by half the executive team, including you, including me, which is exactly why we need to be precise. We are being precise. No, you're being literal. I almost smiled. Those aren't opposites. Daniel didn't. Build the board deck with price first. Service in the appendix. Show the recovery opportunity. What recovery opportunity? The model identifies roughly $25 million in exposed revenue, correct? At elevated risk. That's not $25 million we can save. But intervention can reduce churn. Potentially. Then say that, with a range. Rachel, we have no validated basis for promising $25 million of retained revenue. Daniel leaned against his desk. Nobody gets promoted for presenting uncertainty. I closed my notebook. Nobody should get promoted for presenting a guess as a forecast. The room went silent. 3 years earlier, I would have regretted saying it immediately. This time I didn't. Daniel's face tightened, but when he spoke, his voice was controlled. Send me the analysis by Monday. I will. I'll handle the board narrative. That sentence told me exactly what would happen next. Monday morning, I sent him the complete analysis with methodology notes, confidence ranges, segmentation tables, and a summary identifying service deterioration as a major compounding factor. Maya was listed for data quality and validation work. Aaron was listed for financial validation. I was listed as model owner. By Wednesday, Daniel had built his board presentation. He didn't ask me to review it. I got a copy accidentally when his assistant included me on a logistics email. The title was Customer Retention Strategy. Underneath, Daniel Price, Vice President, Customer Strategy. I scrolled quickly. My charts were there, reformatted. The $25 million exposure had become $25M retention opportunity. My confidence range was gone. The service risk finding had been reduced to one bullet on slide 18. Operational experience remains a secondary churn factor. Secondary. I opened the appendix. The detailed analysis wasn't there. I called Daniel. The board deck misstates the model. Good morning to you too. $25 million is exposure, not a retention commitment. It says opportunity, which implies recoverability we haven't established. That's why it's called an opportunity. And service isn't secondary. He sighed. We've already discussed this. We discussed where you wanted to put it. The data didn't change because you disliked the result. Rachel, I need you to trust me on executive communication. I trusted you on executive communication for 3 years. Silence. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm putting my methodology note in writing. Are you threatening me? No. I'm documenting what the model actually supports. I sent an email that afternoon to Daniel, copying Maya and Aaron because their work was referenced. I kept it unemotional. I listed 3 corrections required for technical accuracy. Distinguish exposed revenue from recoverable revenue, restore confidence ranges, and describe unresolved service failures as a major associated risk factor rather than a secondary one. Daniel replied only to me. Received. I'll take it from here. The board pre-read went out Friday without my corrections. I knew because Aaron called me Monday morning. Did you see what they sent? Yes. Finance isn't comfortable with the 25 million number. Neither am I. Linda asked where it came from. What did you tell her? That the underlying analysis came from your model, but the interpretation wasn't mine. My stomach tightened. What did she say? She asked for the source workbook. I sat back. And? I sent it. For the first time in 3 years, the path from an executive claim led backward instead of stopping at Daniel. The workbook contained version history, methodology notes, my name, Maya's validation, Aaron's financial review. It also contained the service risk analysis Daniel had removed. Tuesday afternoon, CFO Linda Carver emailed me directly. Rachel, please attend Thursday's board retention review. The board has questions regarding model methodology and forecast assumptions. I read it twice. Daniel called less than 10 minutes later. Why is Linda inviting you to the board meeting? You'd have to ask Linda. Did you send her something? No. Did Aaron? He sent finance the source workbook when they requested it. Daniel went quiet. What exactly is in that workbook? I almost couldn't believe the question. The work, Daniel. I mean, what supporting material? Everything required to understand the model, including the service analysis? Of course, his voice hardened. I told you I was handling the narrative, and I handled the model. Don't make Thursday about proving a point. I have no intention of proving a point. Then, if they ask about the 25 million, explain the upside without undermining the strategy. I'll explain what the number means. Rachel, we're on the same team. 3 years of being called support flashed through my mind. Then the same facts should work for both of us. Thursday morning, I arrived 20 minutes early with my laptop and methodology notes. Daniel was already there, rehearsing his opening. His deck was loaded on the conference room screen. My name still wasn't on it. Board members began arriving. Linda entered last, accompanied by the CEO. Daniel stood and started distributing printed copies. I've structured this around the retention opportunity and our mitigation strategy, he told Linda. I can take the board through the key findings. Linda glanced at him, then at me. Actually, before we begin, there's been a change. Daniel stopped. A change? We reviewed the source material yesterday. There are methodology questions we want answered directly. She pulled out the chair beside her. Daniel, we'd actually like Rachel to present the model. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel had no prepared sentence. Rachel? Yes. Linda looked at me. You're the model owner, correct? Yes. Daniel recovered quickly. Of course. Rachel can walk through the technical portions, and I'll frame the strategic implications. Linda nodded without committing to that arrangement. As the others took their seats, Daniel leaned close enough that only I could hear him. Just stick to my slides. I looked at the screen. Customer retention strategy Daniel Price. 25 million presented as opportunity. Service risk buried. 3 years of my work compressed into a story designed to sound better than the evidence. Then I looked at Daniel. Which slides? I asked quietly. The ones you made or the ones I did? Before he could answer, the board chair closed the door and said, Rachel, why don't you start by telling us exactly what this model can and cannot predict? I had presented to executives before, but never to our board, and certainly never with my boss sitting 3 seats away hoping I would repeat a version of my own work that I knew was misleading. I connected my laptop instead of using Daniel's deck. He noticed immediately. Rachel, he said under his breath. Linda looked up. Problem? No, I said. I have the source analysis. The board chair nodded. Good, start there. I put up a plain slide showing 3 columns. What the model measured, what it could predict, and what it could not. No dramatic graphics, no $25 million headline. The first thing I want to clarify is the number in your pre-read, I said. $25 million represents annual revenue associated with accounts currently showing elevated retention risk. It is not a forecast that we can save $25 million. A board member named Robert Gaines glanced down at the printed deck. This says $25 million retention opportunity. I know. Is that wrong? Daniel shifted in his chair. I kept my eyes on Robert. It overstates what the model supports. Some of those accounts will renew without intervention. Some may leave despite intervention. We don't yet have enough controlled outcome data to claim a recoverable amount that precise. Daniel leaned forward. If I can add context, the number was intended to illustrate the scale of the opportunity, not guarantee an outcome. That's fair as strategic framing, I said, but it shouldn't be confused with the model output. Linda looked at me. What is the model output? That was a question I could answer without guessing. I explained how we combined renewal timing, unresolved and reopened service cases, satisfaction changes, account engagement, contract characteristics, and pricing events to identify customers whose behavior resembled accounts that had previously left. I explained that the system ranked risk rather than predicting a binary future. I showed historical validation, false positive rates, and where confidence weakened when customer data was incomplete. Nobody interrupted for almost 5 minutes. Then Robert asked, if price isn't the primary driver, what is? There isn't one primary driver across all accounts. The pre-read suggests the recent increase explains most of the deterioration. It explains part of it. I changed slides. The largest concentration of risk appears when the price increase overlaps with unresolved service problems. A chart appeared showing renewal outcomes across 4 customer groups. Even without an analytics background, the difference was obvious. Customers with the new pricing but healthy service histories are renewing at a lower rate than before, but the decline is manageable. Customers with repeated unresolved service issues are performing worse. Customers with both conditions are leaving at nearly 3 times the rate of comparable healthy accounts. The chief executive looked toward Daniel. Why isn't this in the main deck? Daniel answered before I could. We haven't established causation. I didn't want the board drawing conclusions about the outsourcing initiative without sufficient evidence. That's appropriate, I said. Daniel glanced at me, apparently surprised I hadn't attacked him. I also wouldn't claim causation from this analysis alone. But the association is too large and consistent to classify as secondary. Linda asked, "What would you recommend?" First, stop treating every high-risk account as a pricing problem. A discount won't repair a customer relationship damaged by unresolved service failures. Second, prioritize accounts where service deterioration appears before renewal. Third, run a structured intervention so we can measure which actions actually improve retention, instead of assuming every account we contact was saved by the contact. Robert pointed at the screen. How long would it take? We could begin with the highest risk cohort immediately and have useful early results within one renewal cycle. Stronger evidence would take longer. How much longer? 2 quarters for something I'd be comfortable using for planning. Longer if you want to claim causality. He smiled slightly. You say, I don't know more than most people who present in this room. Only when I don't know. A few people laughed. Daniel didn't. Then another board member, Susan Mercer, flipped through the appendix Linda had distributed separately. I have a more basic question. Who developed this methodology? Daniel straightened. The framework was developed within customer strategy over several years. My group has refined it as our retention program matured. It was technically constructed to sound true. Susan looked at me. Rachel? For 3 years, I had found ways to make myself smaller inside that answer. My team, our group, collaborative effort. I had used accurate language to avoid an uncomfortable truth. I didn't need to do that anymore. I developed the original methodology, I said. Daniel's eyes moved toward me. I continued before anyone could turn it into a confrontation. I built the first model 3 years ago, after identifying the relationship between unresolved service problems and renewal behavior. I've maintained and redesigned it since then. Maya Chen supported the most recent data quality and validation work. Aaron Patel in finance validated the revenue calculations, and several account teams contributed customer-level information we couldn't get from the system alone. Susan looked at the pre-read. And Mr. Price? Daniel is the executive owner of customer strategy. I stopped there. Robert tapped the title page. Why is this called the price retention strategy? Silence settled over the room. Daniel started to speak. That naming convention emerged when Susan looked at me instead. Was that your name for it? No. What did you call it? The retention risk model. Why was it changed? I looked at Daniel, then back at Susan. You'll have to ask Daniel. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The absence of an accusation made the question heavier. Daniel explained that the name had evolved as the work became part of a broader strategy and that price had been used internally as shorthand for the program under his leadership. Nobody challenged him directly. They simply moved on, which at first disappointed me. Then the questions became more technical. How were reopened tickets weighted? How often did thresholds change? What happened when satisfaction data was missing? Could the model distinguish an account that was genuinely at risk from one that simply complained frequently? Daniel tried to answer one question, but Robert redirected it. I'd like Rachel to take this. So I did. For 42 minutes, I answered questions about work I had spent 3 years understanding. I didn't need Daniel's slides. I didn't need notes for most of it. When I didn't know something, I said so and explained how I would find out. When Maya deserved credit, I named her. When finance had challenged one of my assumptions, I said that too. The board wasn't watching an employee suddenly reveal a secret genius. They were watching the difference between knowing a presentation and knowing the work underneath it. Near the end, Linda asked, if we adopt your recommendations, what should success look like? Not $25 million on a slide, I said. Success should be fewer preventable losses, measurable improvement among accounts where we intervene, and enough evidence after 2 quarters to know which interventions deserve investment. The CEO nodded. That sounds less exciting. It is, and more useful. I think so. When the meeting ended, Daniel gathered his papers quickly. Rachel, we need to talk. Before I could answer, Linda said, Daniel, I need you with Mark and legal for a few minutes. Then she looked at me. Rachel, would you stay? Daniel's expression changed. About what? Linda's tone remained neutral. The retention work. He left with the others. I sat back down. My hands were trembling now that nobody was watching them. Linda closed the door. The board chair had stayed too, along with the CEO. For one irrational second, I wondered whether I was about to be reprimanded for contradicting an executive in front of the board. Linda placed the source workbook on the table. That was a strong presentation. Thank you. I'm less interested in complimenting you than understanding how we got here. She turned several pages. These methodology records go back almost 3 years. Yes. You're listed as model owner throughout. Yes. The executive materials don't reflect that. I waited. She looked directly at me. Why did it take us 3 years to know who built this? I could have protected myself. I could have said Daniel controlled the decks, which was true. I could have blamed hierarchy, which was also true. But if I wanted them to understand what had happened, I had to tell the part that made me uncomfortable too. Because Daniel took the credit, I said. Nobody moved. And because I kept letting the work leave the room without my name attached. The CEO frowned. Why? At first I thought it was normal. He was my manager, and he presented upward. Then I thought the quality of the work would eventually make ownership obvious. After that, I worried that objecting would make me look territorial instead of collaborative. Linda asked, "Did you ever raise it with him?" Yes. What happened? He told me not to get hung up on credit. Later he said executives didn't care who built which spreadsheet. The board chair glanced at the workbook. This is not a spreadsheet. I agree. Linda asked me to send her the original presentation history, methodology documentation, and any written exchanges about authorship or the board assumptions. Are you opening an investigation? I asked. We're reviewing how this work has been represented, how the $25 million claim reached the board, and whether performance and promotion decisions relied on inaccurate attribution. That last phrase landed harder than anything else. Promotion decisions. Daniel's vice president announcement had praised the retention framework. My own review had said I lacked executive visibility. Linda must have seen something in my expression. Rachel, don't speculate yet. I'm trying not to. And don't turn this into a prosecution. Send us the record. Let the record do its job. Understood. I left the conference room almost an hour after the board meeting ended. Daniel was waiting near my office. What did you tell them? The truth. Which version? I stopped walking. There's only one version of who built the model. You made me look like I stole your work. I answered a question. You could have said it was developed by the team. It was developed with help from the team. I named everyone who contributed. Except me. What technical contribution did you want me to credit you for? His face went red. I gave you the resources to build it. Then you should receive credit for sponsoring the work. That's not how executive ownership works. Maybe that's what they're reviewing. He stared at me. You have no idea what you've just done to your career. 3 years earlier, that sentence would have terrified me. Now it sounded almost familiar. Maybe, I said. But at least this time they'll know whose career they're deciding. The next morning, Linda's office requested 3 years of presentations, performance reviews, model histories, and email records. By lunchtime, Daniel had been removed as presenter for the retention initiative pending the review. He wasn't fired. He wasn't marched out by security. He was still a vice president with a corner office and years of relationships I didn't have. But for the first time since he had deleted my name from that first slide, Daniel no longer controlled the story of who had created the work. And I was about to learn that the stolen credit had affected far more than presentations. The review lasted 19 business days, and for the first 4, almost nobody told me anything. I went back to work because there was still a retention problem to solve, customers were still approaching renewal, and whatever happened to Daniel would not make a single account healthier. Maya and I built the intervention groups we'd recommended to the board. Aaron helped us establish financial baselines. We separated customers whose primary risk appeared price-related from those showing unresolved service deterioration, then created a third group where both conditions overlapped. I wanted the company to know whether different problems actually required different responses. It sounds obvious when you say it that way. Inside organizations, obvious things can remain invisible for years if one convenient explanation has already reached the executive floor. On the 5th day, Linda asked me to meet with an HR business partner and someone from legal. They didn't ask whether Daniel was a bad boss. They asked for dates. Who created the original methodology? When did the name change? Which presentations had I prepared? Which had Daniel delivered? Had I objected to attribution? Did I have written records? That last question would have frightened me 6 months earlier. Now I had them. Not because I had spent years secretly building a case against Daniel, but because Maya's question had finally embarrassed me into becoming disciplined about authorship. I gave them version histories, methodology notes, presentation drafts, and the email where I had challenged the $25 million interpretation before the board pre-read. I also gave them material that helped Daniel. He had approved resources for the model. He had supported the original pilot. He had advocated for broader adoption after the Hawthorne result. I want the record to be accurate, I told HR, even where it benefits him. The attorney nodded. That's what we're asking for. 2 days later, Linda requested my performance reviews. I knew exactly what she would find. Year 1, exceptional analytical contribution, opportunity to strengthen executive communication. Year 2, significant impact on customer retention, needs broader senior-level visibility. Year 3, trusted technical leader, should seek more opportunities to present strategic recommendations. The irony looked worse when the reviews were placed beside Daniel's executive decks. In the same periods when I was being told to become more visible, presentations based substantially on my work were moving upward without my name. Then HR found something I hadn't known existed. During Daniel's promotion process, he had submitted a leadership impact summary. I never saw the document itself. HR didn't show me confidential personnel material. Linda told me only what directly concerned my work. The retention framework was included as evidence of Daniel's strategic leadership, she said. I felt my stomach tighten. Did he say he created it? I'm not going to characterize the entire document while the review is open. I can tell you the attribution did not adequately distinguish sponsorship from technical development. That was corporate language, but I understood it. My work hadn't merely made Daniel look smart in meetings. It had helped construct the record of his readiness for vice president. Was that why he got promoted? I asked. No promotion is based on one accomplishment. That's not what I asked. Linda held my gaze. It was one factor among several. I sat back. For 3 years, I had told myself credit was emotional, recognition, ego, maybe resentment. Suddenly it looked much more concrete. Credit influenced who was seen as strategic, who was invited to present, who was considered ready for larger responsibility, who could point to measurable outcomes when compensation and promotion decisions were made. Daniel had not stolen my salary directly. He had done something quieter. He had allowed my contribution to accumulate inside his professional identity, while my own reviews described me as insufficiently visible. The next morning, Daniel asked if we could talk privately. I suggested a conference room instead of his office. That distinction wasn't lost on either of us. He closed the door. HR is treating this like misconduct. I don't know how HR is treating it. You know exactly what they're investigating. I know what they asked me. He sat across from me. He looked exhausted. For the first time since I'd known him, I could see fear underneath the confidence. Rachel, I never claimed I wrote code or built the model myself. You called it your framework. I was responsible for the strategy. Then you should have said you sponsored the strategy. That's semantics. Apparently not. He rubbed his forehead. Do you honestly believe I contributed nothing? No. He looked surprised. You approved the pilot. You got leadership attention after Hawthorne. You helped secure resources. You were good at turning technical work into executive conversation. Exactly. Those are real contributions, Daniel. Why weren't they enough? He stared at me. What does that mean? Why did you need mine too? He looked away. That's not what happened. Then tell me what happened. I was leading the department. The framework became part of the department's strategy. My job was to own outcomes. Owning the outcome isn't the same as owning the authorship. You keep using that word like we're publishing research. And you keep pretending names don't matter while yours stayed on every deck. His jaw tightened. Do you know how many people contribute to something before a VP presents it? Product people, analysts, finance, operations. Executives don't list a bibliography every time they speak. I agree. Then what exactly did you expect? I expected you not to tell people you developed something I developed. I said my team developed it. Sometimes. Silence. And sometimes you said you did. Daniel stood and walked toward the glass wall. You could have come to me before taking this to the board. I did come to you. He turned around. Not like this. I told you the attribution was wrong. I asked why you removed names. I challenged my performance review. I corrected the board assumptions in writing. What conversation was I supposed to have after those? You could have told me you were willing to damage my career over it. That sentence clarified more than he intended. You still think the problem is that I finally answered honestly. I think you don't understand how leadership works. Maybe I understand now. He left without another word. The following week, HR closed the review. Daniel wasn't fired. I was glad, although part of me had imagined a cleaner ending where somebody simply declared him wrong and removed him from the building. Real organizations rarely resolve 3 years of blurred credit with one dramatic punishment. The company concluded that Daniel had repeatedly failed to distinguish executive sponsorship from substantive authorship, that several leadership materials overstated his personal ownership of the retention framework, and that the board pre-read had presented unsupported financial interpretation despite documented technical objections. His retention initiative was removed from his direct ownership, his annual incentive was affected, a broader promotion path he'd been discussing was suspended, and his responsibilities were restructured, so analytics no longer reported through him. 6 months later, Daniel left the company for a strategy role elsewhere. I don't know whether he considered that a consequence or an opportunity. By then, I had stopped needing his career to collapse for mine to move. The more difficult conversation happened with Linda 2 days after the review ended. She invited me into her office with the head of customer operations. We need someone to lead customer analytics and retention, Linda said. I waited. We'd like to offer you the director role. 3 years earlier, I would have said yes before she finished the sentence. Instead, I asked, what authority comes with it? Linda smiled slightly. Good question. Does the team own methodology and reporting, or are we producing analysis for another executive to reinterpret? You'd own methodology. Presentation rights? For work originating in your function, yes, though obviously executives will still present enterprise decisions. Reporting line? Customer operations, with a dotted line to finance for retention forecasting. Team? Your current group plus 2 open positions. Compensation? The head of operations gave me the number. It was a meaningful increase, but lower than I expected for the scope. I'd like to discuss that. Linda raised an eyebrow. You haven't accepted yet. I'm interested. That's different. We negotiated for another week. I asked for a higher base salary, authority to hire a senior analyst, and formal ownership of the retention methodology. I didn't get everything. I got enough. When I signed the offer, the feeling wasn't triumph. It was alignment. My title had finally moved closer to the responsibility I'd already been carrying. But the most important change happened afterward. At our first team meeting, I put a simple rule on the screen: own the work, credit the work. I told Maya and the others, company work belongs to the company. That doesn't mean contribution should become anonymous. If you built the analysis, your name belongs on the methodology. If someone helped validate it, name them. If you're presenting someone else's work, say so. Credit is not a limited resource. Maya smiled. That sounds suspiciously specific. It took me a while to learn. 2 quarters after the board meeting, our intervention pilot produced its first credible results. Service-focused recovery significantly outperformed discounting among customers with unresolved operational problems. Pricing interventions worked better for a different segment. We still lost accounts. We still had false positives. Nothing became magical because I had a director title. But we were finally measuring the right things. The estimated annual revenue preserved through targeted interventions was meaningful, and this time, finance validated the calculation before anyone put it on an executive slide. Linda asked me to present the results at the next board strategy session. The night before, I opened the deck and stared at the title page. Retention Risk Review, presented by Rachel Morgan, Director, Customer Analytics and Retention. Underneath were 3 lines: Model Engineering, Maya Chen; Financial Validation, Aaron Patel; Customer Research, Luis Romero. I could have removed them. The board probably didn't need the names. The slide would have looked cleaner without them. I left them exactly where they were. The next morning, Maya came with me because part of the methodology she had improved belonged to her expertise, and when a board member asked about incomplete customer data, I didn't summarize her work. I said, Maya designed that portion. She can answer it better than I can. She did. Watching her speak, I finally understood something I wished I'd understood 3 years earlier. Credit isn't applause. It isn't vanity, and it isn't a favor a manager gives when there's enough recognition to spare. Credit is part of the professional record of who is trusted to know what they were doing. Daniel had understood that long before I did. That was why his name kept staying on the slides, even while he told me names didn't matter. For 3 years, he thought taking my name off the work made it his. In the end, I didn't beat him by humiliating him, destroying his career, or making some perfect speech in a boardroom. I answered questions. I documented my work. I gave other people the credit they had earned, and when someone finally asked who had built the thing everyone was praising, I stopped making myself smaller to keep another person comfortable. A title can control who gets invited into the room. It can decide who speaks first and whose name appears on the agenda. But it cannot answer the questions when the person who actually knows the work is finally sitting at the table.